Good evening. I'm Lillian S. Williams. Welcome to tonight's Eye on the Corridor series. Our moderator this afternoon is Sharon Hawley. I will turn the program over to her now. Welcome, Sharon.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this series, our spring lecture series. That's a collaboration between the University of Buffalo, the Africana Studies, and the American Studies Department, and also a collaboration with the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor. We're so fortunate this evening to have with us our lecturer, who is Dr. Lillian Williams. Dr. Lillian Williams, PhD, is Director of Community Engagement and Associate Professor of the Department of Africana and American Studies at UB, where she was also the former chair of the Department of African American Studies. Professor Williams received her doctorate degree from the University at Buffalo and specializes in United States social and urban history. Her research is in the area of institutions, ethnicity, biography, and women's history. Professor Williams has consulted on several historical projects. She was an expert witness in a federal lawsuit that the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Peoples litigated. She served as historian consultant on the New York State Museum's permanent exhibition, Black Capital, Harlem in the 1920s, and author of the Girl Scouts of the USA monograph, A Bridge to the Future, The History of Diversity in Girl Scouting. She is a founder of the Association of Black Women Historians and the Afro-American Historical Association of the Niagara Frontier. Professor Williams is the recipient of many academic and research awards and honors, including a Rockefeller Foundation Minority Scholars Fellowship, the Nuala Magan Drescher Award, the SUNY Chancellor's Excellence in Teaching Award, and the University at Albany Bread and Roses Award for Distinguished University Service. Williams edited the microfilm edition of the papers of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, the oldest secular African American organization in existence today. She is associate editor of the 16-volume series, Black Women in American History. She also is author of the highly acclaimed Strangers in the Land of Paradise, the creation of an African American community in Buffalo, New York, 1900 to 1940, from Indiana University Press, published in 1999. Currently, Dr. Williams is writing a biography of 20th century activist Mary Burnett Talbert. Welcome again, and welcome, Dr. Williams.
Thank you. I would like to tell you a little bit about Christine Parker, who produced Through These Gates. Christine Parker was one of the most imaginative history experts in Buffalo. Her ability to bring history to life was showcased in the Birchfield Penny exhibit Through These Gates that she mounted as part of her master's degree program at SUNY Buffalo State. Because of her work, John Brent, Buffalo's first African-American architect and first president of the NAACP Buffalo branch, became better known to modern day people who benefit from his legacy, whether in the Jesse Clipper Park, the grand entrance at the Buffalo Zoo, or the Michigan Street YMCA. When I visited Chrissy at the hospital, she was looking forward to enrolling in the doctoral program in UB's Africana and American Studies Department, and she still was working on the Sankofa project that focused upon preservation and the creation of a museum on the east side of Buffalo. The east side lends itself to a museum such as the Tenement Museum in Lower Manhattan. It would be good for Buffalo if her vision becomes reality. I am pleased to introduce you to Christine's important scholarship, and I am grateful to her son, Kenneth Parker, for granting permission for us to include Through These Gates in this evening's program. While focusing upon architect John Brent, it represents the values exemplified by turn of the 20th century Buffalo activists as they plan for their future. Now you will view Through These Gates. Black Buffalonians would take great pride in the Y because they collectively had worked to make it a reality. The Buffalo American, an African American newspaper, noted that young men are coming to the city by the hundreds, and the great need for a YMCA has been felt for some time by those who are far-seeing and desirous of the racist uplift. The Central Y administration was cognizant of the deteriorating conditions in the African American community. In fact, in July 1922, it reported the findings of the Buffalo Federation of Churches survey of the Black community that concluded that housing for African Americans was among the most deplorable in the city. Their community lacked recreational facilities for men and boys, and that African American churches lacked the financial resources to address these social issues. Yet it took no action, even after the General Secretary had acknowledged the untenable conditions Blacks experienced. In response to his lackadaisical response, 150 representative Black men petitioned the Y to begin work among the men and boys of their community. The association hired veteran YMCA administrator and educator William H. Jackson of South Carolina to explore the prospects of creating a branch to serve this, quote, needy, unquote, population that, quote, merited, unquote, a helping hand. In 1923, the Metropolitan YMCA rented temporary quarters on Michigan Avenue to meet the needs of the Black population of Buffalo and Lackawanna. The Secretary General of the Y, A.H. Whitford, later commissioned architect John Brent, an original organizer of the Y, to perform the task of designing a new facility for the African American community. This was a big deal, for as you saw, Brent was only the second African American to receive such a commission in the United States. And this commission launched his independent firm. Jackson surrounded himself with influential business and professional men from the community, many of whom were migrants to the city. They included John Brent, of course, and Dr. Eva Wright Scruggs, Cornelius Ford, and Reverend J. Edward Nash. These men believed that education was one of the most essential programs that the migrants needed, and it designed an educational program to meet those needs. Pragmatism seemed to reign as the Board of Managers planned and implemented programs for the all-Black YMCA. Board member Dr. Scruggs, a migrant from Mississippi and a graduate of Howard University Medical School, cautioned, and I quote, "We must choose between fear of segregation on the one hand and on the other, racial progress. We must choose between developing the best within us in our own institutions, built along the lines of other groups and a means of self-expression for us, or merely content ourselves with becoming a minor part of institutions fostered by other groups." This is the adjustment period. In the years to come, we will have furnished a foundation upon which to develop a superstructure of our civilization. We must build so that the edifice will be strong and inspiring. The diverse backgrounds and experiences which the organizers brought to the planning committee were important, and the programs they created reflected this strength. the Michigan Avenue YMCA became one of the most prestigious, respected institutions within the Black community, and it became a model for Black associations across the country. The Michigan Avenue YMCA catered to the needs of all Black youngsters, regardless of their economic circumstances. Through grants and endowments, membership fees were reduced significantly. Programs were offered Monday through Sunday, ranging from religious studies to occupational training sessions to music academies. Members also could enjoy a 2-week summer camping trip at the YMCA Camp Wales Hollow, courtesy of the newspaper publisher and flower company magnates George and Jenny Matthews. The Metropolitan YMCA in Buffalo had established vocational courses, including auto mechanics, accounting, and plumbing in the branches in 1900. Yet these fields, which required greater skills and commanded higher wages, were not taught at the Michigan Avenue Y. Only 2 vocational courses were offered at the Black branch as late as 1928, furnace operation and household management, because individuals who completed these courses generally were able to secure immediate employment. Males enrolled in the Essentials of Furnace Operation, a 4-month course designed to promote safety and economy for those persons who sought positions as steam boiler operators. The 4-month course in Household Management or Domestic Science included topics on household values, house management, arithmetical problems, housewifery, renovation, menu planning, preparation of food, table service, childcare, budgets, and home life and hospitality. The course was justified by the Education Committee because of the marketability of the skills which were taught. It was extremely difficult for Black women to secure employment outside of the domestic area. If most Black women were to work as domestics in Buffalo, then let them be the best that money could buy. Black women would then monopolize this business and at least minimize foreign competition. It's important to note that at the time, there was no African-American YWCA in Buffalo, and Black women and girls did not feel welcome at the Buffalo YWCA branches. So Black women joined the Michigan Avenue YMCA. They had successfully lobbied the Board of Managements to include programming for them because they argued they had raised significant funds toward the construction of the new Y. In fact, the local press commented on the efforts of the Black campaigns and suggested that other YMCA branches should follow the example of the African-American community. The Michigan Avenue Y also was unique in that it set aside 1 day a week, Thursday, for the exclusive use of women and girls. Thursday, by the way, was the day that domestics did not work, so they could take the opportunity for the enrichment programs offered by the Y. When Buffalo businesses began to hire Black stenographers and typists, the curriculum committee began to offer these courses at the Y as well. It was essential for the Y to offer those courses because the prejudice towards Black women was palpable and business schools refused to admit them. This attitude continued to be a challenge for Black women who sought to advance themselves. An admissions counselor, for example, from the state normal school informed a prospect that they only enrolled students whom they could place in positions. She then told the young woman that, quote, being colored is like having one eye, one arm, or one leg. It was equally difficult for Blacks to gain admission to the nurses training program that the local hospitals conducted, and this state of affairs seriously jeopardized Black community efforts to move forward economically. In response, the YMCA provided crucial training programs so that some women would be prepared to assume those positions when they became available to African Americans. In 1929, the Education Committee organized one of its most popular and extensive programs, a lecture series. Ostensibly, it was for adult members, but it appeals not only to constituents, but also to the community at large. Prominent figures were invited to participate in the forums, and the list reads like a who's who in Black America. Between 1900 and 1936, participants included Dr. Mordecai Johnson, the first African-American president of Howard University, W.E.B. Du Bois, educator, Niagara Movement and NAACP founder and editor of its journal, The Crisis. Congressman Oscar DePriest, the first African-American elected to Congress since those elected during the Reconstruction era. Mary McLeod Bethune, president of Bethune-Cookman College. Nannie Helen Burroughs, president of the National Training School for Women and Girls. Walter White, executive secretary of the NAACP, and Mary Church Terrell, first president of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. Most of these lecturers, like the founders and managers of the Y, were associated with the South, especially through their educational backgrounds. Most of them depended upon the Black community for their livelihood, and they worked within those communities or performed services for them. They too subscribed to the philosophy of self-help and racial solidarity. C.C. Spalding, president of the North Carolina Mutual Insurance Company, or of Durham, lectured on Negro achievement in business. In his 1935 visit, W.E.B. Du Bois spoke on Italy and Ethiopia. The Italian attack on Ethiopia was a clarion call for Black Americans who rallied to raise funds and to influence public opinion. This support represented self-help and racial pride. The Michigan Avenue YMCA catered to the needs of all Black youngsters, regardless of their economic circumstances. Through grants and endowments, membership fees were reduced significantly. Members also could participate in many of the recreational programs that were off-site. But the Michigan Avenue YMCA addressed many of the social needs of its constituents through its guidance program, its health program, its course offerings, its physical education department, its living accommodations, and most importantly, its educational programs. Under the capable leadership of William Jackson, local residents considered it quite successful. Jackson's dedication to the Y led one contemporary to remark, W.H. Jackson, executive secretary of the Y branch, has done more for the Negro race in Buffalo than any other colored man. The leadership ability demonstrated by Secretary Jackson and his aides was recognized by individuals outside of Buffalo as well as inside. In fact, William Pickens contacted Jackson in an attempt to gain his assistance in reorganizing the floundering local NAACP chapter during the early days of the Great Depression. The men and women who were instrumental in the establishment and direction of the Michigan Avenue YMCA had a vision for Black people of Buffalo. They conceived of the Y as a force in elevating or improving the social, cultural, intellectual, and educational conditions of that community. They moved with what at times appeared to be a messianic fervor in planning and promoting activities to enhance the social environment within the community and at the same time improve race relations in the city. Indeed, in this environment that had been plagued by discrimination and segregation with limited opportunities to climb the social or occupational ladder, the Y provided an opportunity for some Black youths, such as Russell Service and Arthur Griffa, to achieve professional status within the Y. The late Leroy Coles, Executive Secretary of the Buffalo Urban League, the late Daniel Acker, NAACP President, grew up as members of the Michigan Avenue YMCA. Many young people were placed in jobs in industry and private homes as a result of the training which they received at the Y. Still others were encouraged to attend college through the career guidance programs offered at the Michigan Avenue YMCA. Generally, the Y was at the forefront of social activities in the Black communities. Its forums and the newspaper, which it later published, portrayed favorable images of African Americans in contrast to the disproportionately negative yellow journalistic images in the commercial press. The expansion of its programs and facilities, the increase of attendance at its functions, and the long list of successful persons who grew up as members of the Y and the efficiency ethic of the 1920s led to the creation of an educational program that became an important source of racial pride for Black Buffalonians. The success of the Michigan Avenue YMCA in meeting its challenges can be attributed primarily to the men and women who provided shrewd leadership in mobilizing and bringing into the Y diverse groups from within the Buffalo community. Moreover, the programs which they established attracted a large endowment fund which guaranteed that the Michigan Avenue YMCA's programs would continue to serve the Black community. I will stop now and take questions.
Okay, we have several questions in the Q&A, and I will read them to you. Jim Holston asks, Professor Williams, you have written eloquently about the Michigan Avenue YMCA in your book. Would you tell us a little more about its social importance and what has taken place in modern day Buffalo? The second part of his question says, and it came after you were talking, said, oops, well, you answered part of my question, but I'm still wondering what you think about the role the Y served a century ago and whether that role is being served elsewhere now.
Okay. At the turn of the 20th century, there were few sites where Blacks could actually achieve recreational facilities. Segregation had become more rampant at that time in the city. In terms of a Y-like organization, Mary Talbert operated from her home on Michigan Avenue, a program designed for girls. But the churches did not have the opportunity to establish individual programs. They had Sunday schools, for example, and there were opportunities for young people to participate in drama clubs and other issues. But the Y focused exclusively on a nonpartisan basis the needs of the African American community. So in that site, in that instance, it achieved successes, but also it won the respect of the community at large. And I want to point out something that may not have been emphasized that I mentioned earlier, and that is the Y from the beginning was established as a segregated facility. I think that's important to keep in mind. And it also was established to accommodate the Black populations, not only of Buffalo, but of Lackawanna too. So it became a regional, if you will, center to meet the needs primarily of Black youth and indeed Black adults, because there were a number of programs for Black adults.
Okay, we have another question by Moses Sybil. Such a powerful and informative film about John E. Brent. Thank you. Should be shown in every school in Buffalo at the very least. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for providing significant historical context. By the way, there is a Brent dining room in the Masonic Temple, Prince Hall affiliation on U Street in Washington, D.C. I wonder if it is named in honor of John E. Brent or his grandfather. Thank you. Kudos to the filmmaker and gratitude to her family for sharing her life and creativity with us.
I don't know the answer to the question, that is, but it's a distinct possibility. The Brents were important figures in Washington and in Buffalo, so there may be something for us to look into. The Prince Hall Order of Masons, which is still active today in Buffalo and certainly was at the turn of the 20th century. So I'll make a notation and see if I can answer that question.
Okay, there's another question from Miss Mary MC. It was stated that when rejected by unions, African-American workers were given a place and support at the Appomattox Club. Were there commensurate economic benefits for these workers as well?
In terms of the union membership, I think mainly advocacy groups. I'm not sure about the details of the members of the Appomattox Club per se, but in terms of the Colored Musicians Club, where Black workers again organized, they were later able to influence the larger labor movement, but they organized because of segregation and because they needed to have access to jobs, you know, in the area and have their needs met, basically. There were collaborations sometimes between Black and white workers, particularly with the Colored Musicians Clubs, but they operated in they operated in silos and came together often after hours to perform at the Colored Musicians Club.
Okay, Gary Earl Ross writes, no question, just a comment. Very informative. The film's production values are impressive. Well done.
Thank you to the
my question to you is, I remember before the transition of Christine Parker, she was embarking on a book about John E. Brent. Do you know at this point where that might be?
No, I don't. We did not discuss that actually. It's something that we can pose to Ken, but I was interested in her establishing the museum. I saw the sites in the Michigan Street corridor as reminiscent of what I had observed in the Tenements Museum in Lower Manhattan. And I think it would be phenomenal if we could use our leverage to get such an establishment here.
Are there any other questions or comments that you wish to place in the Q&A at this time? Okay, there's one up. Okay, it was Chasten Cohen's. I don't know if I can unmute you, but if you would like to ask your question. Okay. Can you unmute?
Hello, can you hear me?
Chasten Cohen's?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, sorry, I was trying to type, but it was going too slow.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment and I guess a slight question. Just from an architectural standpoint, I feel that architecture does play a huge role in our community, and it is slowly fading within our community as far as highlighting these Black architects such as John E. Brent and Robert T. Coles.
Mm-hmm.
How would you or why would you say that our culture is slowly fading from the architecture realm, and how do we get that aspect of the Black community as a whole and how it really does affect our normal every day-to-day lives back into our culture and really re-educate society?
I guess one of the things that Preservation Buffalo and the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor and other groups are doing is to identify, first of all, these sites, buildings, so that they can indeed be preserved and information about them disseminated. So right now it's a question of identifying. As you know, so much of the corridor has been destroyed. You know, with urban renewal, it's removal. And there's other terms that we use in terms of removal, but essentially trying to identify buildings and put up markers and tell the stories of these individuals. And it's interesting to note too, in fact, one of the things I like so much about the film, because it depicts African-American culture. You see professionals committed to the communities themselves, to educating them, the constituents within these communities, to creating opportunities for affecting change. So they're involved in civil rights, they're involved in international affairs, what's happening to Ethiopia as a result of World War II. They are well aware of their communities and they are devoted to those communities. And you see that with the professionals, whether they were medical practitioners or, you know, architects, like in the case of John Brent. Ministers, of course, have a long history of engaging in those activities. But there was a sense of community and people took ownership in those institutions. The Y, for example, I remember even in undergraduate school when the Y was at its end, the end of its line, essentially, but people spoke about the legacy. And I didn't understand until I began to study the Y, what a major impact it had in the lives of its constituents.
We have another question is, and you were just answering that, and that is, why was the Michigan Y torn down?
I don't know enough about those circumstances. I'm assuming that it was deteriorated, or folks thought it was, and it would be more costly to restore it, but I don't know that that's the answer to the question. But I see that it's a part of urban renewal in not only in Buffalo in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, but bulldozers just came through and destroyed the neighborhood. And you see now so many vacant lots, and what impact did that have on the community itself? And it has been a negative impact.
Okay, I have one comment I want to make, and that is through Brother Clifford Bell and his group, the Buffalo Museum Project of Buffalo. They have reconstructed a history of the YMCA that's, what do I want to say? It's a mobile exhibit that they have placed at the Central Library every year in February, where they have interviewed people who were part of the programs at the Y, and they have also tried to talk about the history and show pictures of the activities at the Y. So if anyone has a chance to see that or know how to contact Brother Bell, I'm sure he would be glad to bring that to your place of employment or in the community. I have another question here.
Sharon, can I ask you?
Sure.
Can you tell me where those oral histories are?
Which oral histories are?
That Brother Bell has collected.
They're on tape. So he had taped Derek Bird and other people who were longtime residents or had affiliation with the Y. I'm not sure if he had taped Mr. Leroy Coles, before his transition, but he does have some tapes of people who were involved in activities at the Y before it was torn down.
So they're not in the repository.
Not
basically.
that I know of, not right now.
Mm-hmm.
Another question in the chat. It seems it would be very fitting to, in a near time, have Mr. Brent acknowledged at the Meriwether Library in a significant way by Mr. Coles, Buffalo's African-American architect, recently deceased. I can say that during Christine's time, she did have an exhibit in that library on John Brent, and family members were present for that.
And there was a major exhibit of her work too at the Birchfield Penny. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but that was a phenomenal exhibit that focused upon Brent primarily, but there was a smaller component that looked at African-American men and women architects in Buffalo.
Okay, we have a comment from Kenneth Parker. This is Christine's son.
And welcome, thank you.
Welcome, Kenneth. My mom mentioned it to my sister about writing a book about John Brent, but she had to get the authorization from the Brent family to write it, is what he says. Do you want to be unmuted, Kenneth, so you can tell us more about that? Are we able to unmute Kenneth Parker? Okay.
Good evening.
Hi, welcome.
Hi. No, I don't have anything else further to say about that. I know that my mom said a few things to my sister Angelina Castro about a lot of things in her work that she wanted to do in the future before her passing. But I know for sure that she has a lot of work unfinished, and our family is taking the time to heal right now of her death. But I think in a few months or so, we're actually going to be looking through her things and actually see what else she has of John Brent and other different activities and events that she was planning on doing with history. And I knew she had a lot of different projects in notebooks and sketches and things like that. And we just need the opportunity to actually look at those plannings that she was doing before she passed away.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
And I would just love to thank you guys from the Parker and Castro family for honoring my mother in this, and I appreciate Dr. Lillian for her efforts and her job well done on this event tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
From Kate Massey, we have, to be clearer, I meant to indicate Mr. Coles as the architect. And I do know that Mr. Coles' architectural contributions were involved in that exhibit at the Birchfield Penny as well. Okay.
And
So,
Bill Senior has co-authored a book on Robert Coles too. This was done maybe 45 years ago. There was a special forum celebrating his work at the University of Buffalo School of Architecture and Planning.
I don't have any more questions in our Q&A or chat. So if you would like to make some closing remarks, Dr. Williams.
Well, actually, I'd like for you, Sharon, to tell us a little bit about you. I introduced you a little more quickly than I had intended to. So why don't you tell the audience what your background is and the fact that you also serve on the board of directors of the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corp.
Well, I am serving on the Board of Commissions for the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor, and I'm representing the Nash House Museum. I'm representing the Michigan Street Preservation Corporation that owns the Nash House Museum. I'm also a professional storyteller, and with my husband, Kenneth, we operate Zawadi Books, an African-American owned bookstore in the city of Buffalo. I also am a board member of the Afro-American Historical Association of the Niagara Frontier and the Buffalo Genealogical Society of the African Diaspora, and too many others to mention. I'm retired, believe it or not, retired librarian from Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. Not a historian by any search of the word, but I do love history. And I'm so appreciative of these forums where we get to talk about some of the history in the city of Buffalo and the Western New York area. So I want to thank you for your contributions, not only on this project, but through the work that you've been doing, your writings, your book, Strangers in the New Land. And of course, we're looking forward to the biography on Miss Mary B. Talbert. I have a lot of questions about Miss Talbert. I do, at least. And so we're looking forward to that. I see one other question in the Q&A. I'm going to go there. Oh, it's from Angelina. Hi, Angelina. She says, thank you, Dr. Williams, for honoring my mom tonight. I appreciate it. And thank you for your comments, Angelina. We appreciate you.
Absolutely.
So go ahead, Dr. Williams.
If there are no more questions, I'd like to thank you all for attending this evening's forum. I invite you to come back next week where Dr. James Holston will be talking about a 19th century African-American poet, James Whitfield. And it will be moderated by Miriam Faggart, Dr. Miriam Faggart of the University of Buffalo Department of English too. So thank you again for coming, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.